Stay tuned after the stories for the question of life or death. The Jersey Devil is real. This world is a strange one. The Jersey Devil has haunted the bogs, swamps, and forests of New England for decades. This abomination of a creature is said to be the offspring of the devil himself. It has demonic wings, the body of a horse or goat, and it is often reported with hooves or claws. It's easily one of the most terrifying unknown creatures in the world. It also has the creepiest backstory. It was born to Mother Leeds, a mother of 12 children who claimed that her next must be the devil. When her 13th child was born, it suddenly changed into a hideous creature before her eyes, killing the midwife before escaping through the chimney. Ever since, the creature has stalked the pine barrens of New Jersey and other parts of New England. And now, tonight, I have 4 true stories to share with you. 4 encounters with the Jersey Devil. Beware the clatter of hooves and the flying things in the night. Number 1. Camping in the Pine Barrens. Submitted by contest winner GW. Before I get you all started with my experience, I'll give you a little background on me. I spent most of my life hunting and in the outdoors, so I know the various sounds. I can tell the difference between a deer and a person walking. I also am pretty good at tracking and would track my friends while hunting, so the one thing that I never expected was to be tracked myself in the woods at night. This happened a year ago to the month, while out camping with my grandfather in New Jersey. I had just graduated school and was leaving for boot camp soon, so my grandfather wanted to go on one last trip before I was gone. The beginning of the trip was pretty smooth, lots of hiking and fishing. We went to the last place we were going to camp, and already, it was pretty eerie. There were almost no people here. We were about as far as you can get in. We had set up and already eaten, so I decided I might as well walk down to the wash house about a mile down from us. The park had signs up about bears, so I had my knife on me. This being New Jersey after all, we have strict gun laws. I got down there no problem. Only saw one person, and they were getting ready to head out. I take my shower and do my usual hygiene routine. By the time that's over, it's already pretty dark out. Almost 100 meters down the road, the atmosphere goes south fast. It went from bugs making noise to dead silence. Something I had never experienced in my time outdoors. It has never been that silent. You know that feeling, almost like a sixth sense, of knowing something isn't right? Well, that was going off in my head. I slowed down my steps to reduce the noise, and I listened. About 20 yards to my right, something was parallel to me, walking. My first thought was probably a bird hopping in the leaves, but every time I stopped, it would stop as well. Listening closely, I could hear it better, and I could get a better idea of the thing. I could tell that it had enough size to snap branches, and also that it was on 2 feet. I was carrying a large hunting knife as my only protection, and I know that wouldn't do much if it was to jump out at me. I couldn't run no matter how much I wanted to, because I knew that it would catch me. The only bet I had was to keep the same pace and keep going, ready to fight or run. I walked the almost entire way back like this. I couldn't tell anyone because who would believe this? I barely slept that entire night, expecting to hear it come closer and to see it. I have only told this story to a couple of friends of mine, and they know that I couldn't even begin to make up a story like this. To this day, I want to go back there, yet at the same time, I never want to return. This is all I have to share, and it concludes my odd, creepy experience. Number 2. The Devil of Bear Swamp. Submitted by Raven Boy. My family was always in a financial rut, especially after my mother passed and my father moved to New Jersey with me and my sister. If you're familiar, New Jersey property prices aren't as bad as New York's, but their taxes are crazy. That as it is, me and my father always took work, whether it was running a good truck, cleaning some guy's house, or working on the road. Our most common job was truck driving. He got a somewhat stable job from a family friend who owned a trucking company down near Newark. It likely isn't there anymore. He had to relocate after flooding. We would haul shipments of food and metals, deliver truck parts, or even just do something as simple as take it for repairs when the mechanics weren't available. Making $200 for just driving a couple of Mack trucks, it was pretty good work for someone my age. Not to mention my father, who was half crippled, who couldn't even lift himself off the floor if he were to fall. All of this would change, however. We had a job to deliver food supplies to Fort Dix, pretty standard. We ended up delivering more than required, and my father, being the sneak that he was, decided to keep a chest of meat for ourselves. It was about mid-August, near the end of the summer rush for people to come to the shore. This meant a large amount of drunken young folks, families, and even the occasional nudist would flock down the highways like a group of birds, swarming the beaches and boardwalks. This meant an extra buildup of traffic, and thus, more accidents. We listened to the traffic report whenever we made a haul, short or long. It provided us with weather, what routes to avoid, and so on. This is how we knew our usual route was piled up after a drunk driver got behind the wheels of an SUV, plowing into another car, and the domino effect just followed. Luckily, the pileup was pretty small. But for us at the time, it was more than a small nuisance, needing to plan a detour with the sun setting, already behind schedule. To make it short, after cursing out the tourists on the radio, we decided to simply take the more secluded, rural back roads of the surrounding Barrens. This was mostly Bear Swamp, a large nature reserve and hunting area during the deer season. It also had some bear and even bald eagle preservation, but I can assure you, what we saw and heard on that back road, it was no eagle. The detour put us off schedule for about an extra hour and a half, sending us right through the swampy roads, flooded with mud and dirt, not to mention the pitch-black darkness and having to drive slowly due to deer or coyote running across the road in the pitch-black darkness. I remember joking with my father about going for a swim in the swamp because our AC had broken at the time. "Hey Dad, how's about a dip with those gators?" He said something along the lines of wishing he could feed Saul, the family friend, to the gators for not getting the dang air fixed. The night swamp was oddly mystical looking as I watched it from the open windows. A bright star and the few lightning bugs you could see in the distance. It was a really good scene. Despite what most say of Jersey, it isn't all smokestacks and highway. Something was off, however. Middle of summer, driving past the swamp, normally you would hear the calls of frogs or even an owl in the pines. Granted, our truck engine would be spooking most of the animals, but all the same, this amount of noiselessness was out of place. As I enjoyed the view, my body flung forward against the dashboard as my father slammed on the brakes. He hit the horn at the same time. "What the hell?" I practically shouted at him, my teen voice still cracking. How stupid I must have sounded. "Deer on the road. Big sucker, too. Should tell your granddad to come out here next winter." He was plain and simple about it, something I hadn't inherited from him. Pulling myself into my seat, I strained my eyes to see past the darkness, to which I did see a tuft of hair disappearing from our headlights, flicking like that of a cat's tail. Oddly, it was dark from what I could see. The fur was blackish ginger instead of the usual brown or white a deer would have. Its length was off as well. If I could guess, I'd say it was a good 5 inches long. About another 20 minutes later, we had made it deeper into the wooded area, passing the farmland and meeting the old cabins and hillbilly hotels that scattered the woods like buckshot. It wasn't like a suburban cul-de-sac in the middle of the woods. These houses were spaced out a good 15 minutes from each other, if not more, as we were making our way down the long winding path, praying not to get shot by some crazed redneck, who we may have awakened from a deep sleep. It hit us. And literally, a loud snapping noise like a metallic bang as something landed on top of the truck. First, we imagined it was just a tree limb hitting the top of the truck. Being quite tall, it had knocked many branches off before, but it began moving, like rocks hitting the metal. All you heard was snap, clank, snap, clank. as whatever it was too tall to move under the branches, hitting the roof and trailer. At this point, my dad stopped, intending to exit the cabin and see the commotion for himself. Then came the most horrific thing I've ever seen in my life. Even now, as I share this. Grizzled, dark hair, gingerly black like it was burnt, long round snout like a donkey, but with bulldog-like teeth, fangs peeking from its lips. Its claws were just that, long finger-like appendages that ended in sharp, almost metallic-looking talons that scratched across our windshield. Hanging from each arm was a long flap of skin connected to its barrel-shaped chest as it slithered across our hood. If I had to guess a length and width, I'd say it was about as big as a professional basketball player, probably around 200 or so pounds. Its eyes weren't glowing like most would say, but in the light of our cabin, they reflected like that of a cat's eyes. It had next to no ears, just a flat head, except for two curled growths on its head, like filed-down antlers, dull and short. As it stared into our truck, its nose flared and exhaled deeply, its breath fogging up the glass before it slithered back up, the clanking noises returning as it climbed over the truck itself, hitting the roof of the trailer, its tail coming up and lashing about. The tail was long and reptilian, dark gray with a tuft of mangy hair on its tip, thin and large at the same time. It lashed out sideways, swooping off the hood before smashing into the side of the truck. I've been in plenty of car-on-car accidents, and I can tell you honestly that when you're in a vehicle that is rocking back and forth on two wheels, it's not pretty. As we landed back down on our left side, the tail swooped out again, with just as much force, shattering my father's window. Never before have I seen a 50-year-old man nearly soil himself. The creature must have reached the back of the trailer. I started feeling as if we were tipping backwards before a loud screech ripped through the air. Honestly, if anyone has ever heard a bat squeak, imagine it amplified and drawn out. Just as I was about to break down in a panic, a loud ripping noise followed, a series of loud clanks as its claws dug through the back of the truck. This was met by the truck jerking violently, back and forth, the sound of heavy breathing in our ears as it climbed in the trailer, and a lurch as it climbed out. Finally, the sounds of branches snapping and a quickly fading flap, 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 as wings flew off into the night. We sat there in silence. We were scared to death. Our truck just sat there as we stared at the dimly lit dirt path before us, partially unsure of what happened, half expecting the thing to return, and half not believing what actually happened. After 10 minutes of sitting in cold sweat, we started the engine and drove to the yard another 2 hours. And the entire way there, we were silent. We told Saul about the dragon, but he wrote it off quickly as backwood freaks trying to rob us for food. We did discover a whole crate was busted open at the lock, the door as well hanging on a hinge that was discovered by a cop who had pulled us over halfway there. Growing up in Jersey, you always hear stories of the devil, the old legend of the Lees family, or the tale of the King of Spain, the joke about the man and the kangaroo. But most only believe them as stories, nothing more. But that night, looking into the snorting nostrils and hearing that blood-curdling scream, I was convinced that the devil is no myth. Perhaps they're right. New Jersey really is a portal to hell. Number 3. Possible Jersey Devil sighting. Submitted by Bob. I've seen quite a few things that I have a hard time explaining. In case I submit any others, I'll just give you some background information for now. My father served in the military. He was descended from a Native American tribe from up north, was a survivalist, and a complete sociopath. He would often force his sons into intense survival scenarios and then left us for weeks on end to see if we'd survive. I've seen some truly disturbing things during these camping trips, and some things in less stressful settings. Anyway, I'll get on with this sighting. I was 11. I had just moved back to America less than a week before. My family had decided to take a short road trip up to Maine to visit some family when we went off course. Being 11 and naive enough to think I would actually make it to Maine before my father did anything stupid, I didn't pay attention to when he pulled off onto a back road. To this day, I do not know where I was dropped off at, just that it was in a dense, forested area. I think it was in New York, but I can't say for certain. Before I knew it, I was kicked out of the car, handed my canteen, a bow, a compass, a quiver, and a knife. I was told that they'd be back after visiting family, and I'd have 15 days out there. I did the basic survival things. I found drinkable water, I built shelter, plotted out a rough map of the area in my head. All of those sort of things that I had learned growing up. It was my 3rd or 4th night there, when I heard what sounded like a woman screaming. Since mountain lions didn't come out this far east, and bears were easy to scare away if it was one, I figured that I'd go investigate, in case it was an injured hiker or something. After following the sound, all I could find was a squirrel that was partially eaten. Since the screaming had stopped, I figured that someone had come across the nasty sight while they were hiking, and ran off or calmed down and went back to hiking. So I went back to my shelter and settled in for the night. After that, though, the screaming became a nightly occurrence, and after the 3rd night of not finding anything aside from the evidence of a predator in the area, I decided to play it safe and stay in my shelter at night. 2 days before my family would be back, where I was dropped off at, I woke up in the middle of the night to screaming right outside my shelter. I jumped out, terrified, bow in one hand, my knife and an arrow in the other. What I saw terrified me. It had to have been about the size of a dog, but shaped more like a deer. It had a very humanoid face, though, and was covered in dull, black scales. I panicked, and I shot the thing in the chest. It began hissing and wheezing as it ran off into the trees. I had thought about following it and killing it, but when I looked at its tracks, I saw something that convinced me otherwise. The creature's hind legs left behind the tracks of a small deer. The front legs, however, left the tracks you'd see from a person walking on their hands like a gorilla. Only the fingers ended with sharp claw marks scratching up the earth while it moved. I didn't sleep at all the rest of that night, and on the following morning, I dug several holes around my camp and filled them with sharpened sticks and stakes, and I covered them. I also did some squirrel hunting and harvested berries as fast as I could once my defenses were up, so that I wouldn't need to worry about losing my strength if that thing came back. It didn't that night. Not that I got any sleep anyway. In the morning, I just carved a simple warning into the trees around my camp that just said, "Danger, traps," and I left. I didn't let go of my bow until after I was picked up and we had been driving for over an hour. I honestly don't know what I saw or if the light had been playing tricks on me, but I know that I did hear something screaming that night, and I know what I saw in the tracks of that creature. I just know that I heard something screaming, and that I know I saw those devilish tracks. Number 4. The Sound of the Devil. Submitted by JiffyPop87. When I lived in southeast Pennsylvania, I would often go on walks with my dog, Randy, through wooded trails near my home at night. I've always enjoyed the nighttime. It seems more peaceful, not to mention I loved painting and sketching. Every time I went on one of those walks, I'd come back refreshed and inspired. I did my best painting on these late nights. The trails we walked on used to be bustling four-wheeler trails that the neighbors used almost constantly. They had been avid hunters, fishers, those sort of folks. They were also extremely nice and didn't mind me using the trails as often as I wanted to. Sadly, though, the couple that owned the property had died a few months before this story took place. The man had died of a heart attack, and his wife passed away maybe 6 weeks after from what my mother said was old age. It was depressing, really. They were some of the nicest people I have ever met. At the start of the trail, you could see their 2-story home on top of a hill overlooking the nearby lake. It was gorgeous. I wished I could live there. Now the place was dark, and it seemed hollow. That night, I stood staring at their house for a moment, thinking about life a little more than I was used to, before I took an impatient Randy into the woods. He was really excited. He usually was when he went on walks, but tonight he seemed more anxious. For the first time since he was a puppy, Randy was tugging at my leash as I tried to keep up. He was never that pushy. He seemed to have found the scent of something curious. Randy kept his nose to the ground and kept zero slack on the leash. It was hardly peaceful with the dog dragging me around. But I didn't want to reprimand him. I mean, he had never acted up like that before, so I let him keep going. Who knows, maybe he'd stumble on something interesting. Or gross, we all know how dogs are. I started to worry, though. The moment he stopped, he began to whimper. His ears fell flat as he looked straight ahead, eyes wide. I could see him sniff the air in between whimpers. To be honest, it kind of freaked me out. All of this was beyond unusual for him, and it was dark, in the middle of the woods. The creepy factor of it all was palpable. It was tempting to head back. Before I could even decide whether or not to keep going, Randy snapped backward and ran back on the trail so quickly that I lost my grip on the leash. He ran full speed toward home. And after a few moments, I was alone in the woods. The realization of that fact hit hard. It seemed to fall silent. The nocturnal insects chirped at a whisper now. Too spooked to run, if that makes any sense, I turned back to walk home. I was honestly a little pissed at Randy for being such a wuss and abandoning me, but I was just so ready to be home. I needed some sleep anyway. I walked the slightly uphill trail as fast as I could, without going too fast that it made me feel like I was running from something. Then I heard it. It was a screech, a howl, and a scream at the same time. Have you ever heard something so sudden and out of this world that it not only made you jump, but it sent chills throughout your whole body? Imagine that twice over, and that is how I felt the moment I heard it. I couldn't understand how something could sound so human and inhuman at the same time. What worried me even more was the fact that I couldn't place where it came from. I started to jog now. I have no earthly idea why I didn't just run. When I heard the call again, my heart seemed to jump into my throat. It was cold that night, but I was sweating. Finally, I pushed myself to run. That noise was so far beyond human, I was sure I'd be dead if I didn't run with everything I had. After a painful minute of running, I broke through the trail's opening and was out of the woods. I didn't bother to turn around. I was just glad that I was away from whatever I had heard. But the screaming came again. The sound had been coming from ahead of me, not behind me. I had run toward the noise. How could I not have known it was coming from ahead of me? I clambered backward, terrified. I couldn't go back into those woods, but I couldn't go forward toward those noises. Clomp, 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 clomp. I heard footsteps. They were coming from directly ahead of me, maybe 30 or 40 feet away. But I couldn't see anything. There were trees shrouded in complete darkness, peppered sporadically throughout the clearing. It must have been hidden by the shadows. For several agonizing moments, there was silence. No screaming, no footsteps. Maybe it was my imagination. I was praying that that's what it was. To my horror, a face poked out of the darkness. It was just a goat. I almost laughed with relief. I was confused, but at least I wasn't horrified anymore. I remember thinking where the hell the goat had come from. We didn't own one, and neither had the neighbors. I picked myself up, eager to get home. I walked forward and to the left where the trail went to the backyard of my home. I looked back. To this day, I regret looking back. What I thought was a goat was hovering at least 15 feet in the air. Wings somehow darker than the night flapped behind it. I had enough. I turned and broke into the fastest run I could muster. In seconds, I was opening the back door and locking the deadbolt. I stared out of the window. The center 80% of the door was made of glass. But I didn't see anything. I kept staring for the longest time, wondering what the hell I had just seen. There was nothing. Thank God there was nothing. Eventually, I turned around toward the living room. My dog, Randy, was just sitting there on the couch, looking up at me like he had been waiting for me for a while. My parents must have let him in. I don't know what it was I saw that night. I've told quite a few people about my experience, but no one believes me. I doubt anyone ever will. And to be completely truthful with you, this isn't so much a story as it is a confession. I want an explanation. And every time I tell this tale, it makes me feel a little bit better. So thank you for listening. For those of you that don't live near New Jersey or New England, you must think you have nothing to fear. Well, I wouldn't be so sure of that. The Jersey Devil is a flying beast, and similar sightings have been reported all over the country. So, next time you think about having a walk outside by moonlight, you might want to think twice, or you might never come back. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Thanks. Now, are you ready for the life or death question? Which known animal scares you the most? Do you hate spiders? Or are snakes your Achilles heel? For me, it's giant centipedes. I mean, screw those things. Jesus Christ. I found one on the side of my house once. It was the first time I've ever seen one. The thing, no joke, was 2 feet long and 2 inches wide. When I tried to crush it under my shoe, it acted like nothing had happened. It was harder than a freaking rock. And it was disgusting. I ended up carrying it in a bucket back to the woods. That was the day I understood. Satan must have made that sucker himself. So let me know in the comments what freaky animals in the world do you think are the most terrifying?